And it is saying that we are live. Good afternoon. Here's the thing. Have you or ever noticed how business meeting and first date have one thing in common? Both can end with someone disappearing without a trace. At least on a date, you know who's paying the bill, right?
Not
Good
necessarily.
afternoon. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to have you join us for today's insightful discussion on a topic we've all encountered: ghosting in the business world. But before we dive into the silence epidemic of missed emails, meetings, and deals, let me introduce the brilliant minds who help us unpack it. First, we're honored to have the incredible Dr. Pauline Crawford with us, a true pioneer in the world of gender dynamics and communication, known for bridging the gap between how men and women connect in business. Next up is Michael Gates, who is an expert in cross cultural communication and negotiations. He is currently in Lithuania delivering a keynote speech at a huge conference, and he's showering us with his presence and honoring us with presence. We are so grateful. He knows all too well how cultural differences can sometimes lead to radio silence. And of course, my wonderful co-host Maria, whose energy and expertise keep every conversation lively and insightful. So today we have mentioned several times the topic, and I find ghosting to be more than just an answered email or missed meeting. It is a communication breakdown that undermines trust, stifles growth, and waste valuable time. So, my question is, why has it become so easy for professionals to simply vanish from conversations, negotiation, or partnership meeting? What's changed in our business culture that allows this behavior to thrive?
Me.
Go right ahead.
This is a fascinating topic and it's something that I've kind of looked into. We know that the first generation to start ghosting was the millennials. Why? Because if you look back around the 90s and aughts, we went from having to call on a landline to all beepers and then radios and texting. As soon as we started going into the asynchronous communication mode, where you had access directly to your party, you could crowdsource your witty response and decide when and how you were going to respond. That's when everything broke down because you didn't have to think on your feet anymore and you could avoid conflict and you could just take a step back and a lot of people think it's a lot more polite to just avoid conflict, but I'll tell you what happened. While we were doing the asynchronous communication, we were losing all of our ability to communicate and manage conflict. So actually what I've seen is that the studies show that millennials are more comfortable, and millennials, I mean anyone from 28 to 41. So that cohort generation, they're more into ghosting. A Gen Z who is like in their 20s, they do it, but a little less. They recognize that it's not so good to do. But I think that we've got that big chunk, that generation that started making that okay. And a lot of people have started taking on that really bad habit. And I'll get off my soapbox, but I just had to get something in there. And none of us are millennials or Gen Z, so we might be a little biased here, but I'd love to hear from you.
Well, absolutely. I'd love it. As I am nowhere near millennial, I am definitely baby boomer. My kids are Gen X, so I have to be baby boomer. And I think the point you make is fascinating, is that it's a new term and it's been developed a habit. As we know, habits become real. They've not been there before. It's not a habit that I knew. I remember when the telephone was attached to the wall and you had a long wire and you had to sit on the staircase, but it cost, in England, it cost 4 pennies when I was a kid. So it shows you how long ago. So now that we have these infamous things, it's fascinating to me that people who do have this habit of ghosting thinks it's okay. There doesn't seem to be accountability or a sense of responsibility. I was brought up with a very strong value about responsibility. If you're going to not do something, then say you're not going to do it. And why do people now become nervous and hide behind this machinery? I think the habit, if we know that habits get embedded, they become the norm. So some of these younger generation, they just think it's normal. So I think the responsibility is for us to get together in conversation. It's a practice that I use where we get into conversation without judgment. So we don't judge them for their lack of responsibility, because that's pointing out, in a sense, the obvious, but invite them to say, why do they hide behind that? What is the fear? I'd love to know Michael's view on this, dealing with so many cross cultures. I have lived in Asia, in Malaysia, and I've come from England. I live in America. So, and I'm on Zoom with lots of different cultures. The cultural differences are really important, but the age difference, this idea that X-Gen and millennials have put this new habit into the world. So that's our challenge, isn't it? Changing habits has to be owned by the people who are doing the habit. What do you think, Michael?
Well, I think going back to the first point, that technology has almost created this problem. And I know, my kids never use the phone. My eldest son, who's 35, he's in the high-tech field. And if the phone rings, he doesn't answer. He panics. Someone actually ringing me. And it used to be a lot more immediate, I think. I think it's had its advantages. I remember, well, I was going to say not too long ago, but maybe just over 30 years ago, which doesn't seem that long to me. Coming back to the office to a huge pile of faxes, all of them saying urgent. And that used to put me under a lot of stress. So I actually prefer being contacted, sort of drip fed problems during the day to deal with. And I suppose I was brought up that it was polite to respond immediately. And I do it to a fault. If I wake up at 4 a.m. and, check my phone, which I shouldn't do, and there's an urgent mail from someone, then I'll answer it. And I'm sure, Mona, you've had responses from me at very strange times of day for me. So I sort of go to the other extreme. And I get quite upset if someone doesn't reply. And I think it is also cultural, not just generational. And people don't reply for different reasons. And certainly I found with the Chinese and Thais, for instance, that very often if they don't reply, it's because they're not sure how to reply in English and they're worried that they're going to make a mistake. And particularly if you send them a really long mail, then you're very unlikely to get a reply. So I think part of it, of getting replies, if you're thinking across cultures, is to use the medium that people are happier with. So dealing with my Chinese clients, it was much better to send them a short message on WeChat, which they use. And nearly always I get an immediate response. An email, I might never get a response. With Finns, because I live in Finland, and I've lived there 37 years. I think it's more that if they don't have anything new to say, then they don't reply. So if you say, when is the invoice going to be paid? And in fact, that's not such a good example because Finns pay invoices very quickly. But if you say, for example, when's the invoice going to be paid? And there's no reply, then you find out later it's because we don't know. So they only reply if they've got something substantial to say. For me, I much prefer getting a holding answer, which to my mind should come very quickly, saying, I'm sorry, I can't reply yet because I don't know. I'll reply in a couple of days, or I'm busy at the moment. I'll reply at the weekend. I don't know. I mean, I just feel it's politeness.
And also, we're talking about the answering emails and or texts. How about standing somebody up? I mean, we experienced that, and there was a post on LinkedIn the other day where a gentleman salesman drove 2.5 hours to meet a client just to sit there and wait and wait and wait, no show, no call. Is that becoming a habit? I mean, we're not psychologists, and we can never read people's brain and their mind, but it's becoming more frequent in today's world, in today's business world.
In the workplace, you see many of the managers that I work with, and I found some stats. So I'm finding that among Gen Z, which is 27 and younger, about 17% won't show up for an interview, which is, I think, the case that Mona was talking about. About 15% won't show up on their first day of work. About 11% might quit with no notice. And a study done at Roanoke University surmised that part of the reason was that this younger generation, and possibly it was, I don't know, lockdowns during COVID that made them, lose some of their soft skills abilities, but it's a lack of communication skills, of not knowing how to have an honest conversation, not knowing how to establish a boundary, or not knowing how to say no or give bad news. So it's just, I guess they think it's polite, but they actually don't realize that it comes across as being cowardly and disrespectful. And I think that that's something that's very important as managers. If you have a team of early career professionals, it's very important to foster a culture of constant feedback and communication, especially with the young early career professionals.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And I think the interesting word that Michael mentioned and you did as well is this, that isn't it polite to connect? So the fear of not knowing how to connect that's been lost. And there's no sense of what that interesting word, politeness. If you go and talk to millennials about politeness, they might go, I don't even know the word. But it's like I've done exercises on building a moral compass, and in Malaysia I was looked at as if I was an alien. What does that mean? So the translation of words is important: politeness, moral compass, manners. And I think what we need to do is to go into that generation and that culture and ask them, what could this mean to you? Explain it in the words that they would understand. Because I think it comes back to respecting other people and the technology. And as you say, when people just don't answer because they don't know what to say, it leaves you in a void of assumptions. And we make all sorts of assumptions about what's going on. And then we make judgments on those assumptions. And then we say that person is, bad news. And actually, they may just be totally fearful of making some kind of communication.
I was listening to a podcast Dr. Pauline, speaking about technology. I was listening to a podcast the other day, Dr. K. Dr. K is well-known psychiatrist who frequently discusses mental health in the context of modern digital culture. And he has spoken about how social media can promote narcissistic tendencies in individuals, including behavior like ghosting. He points out that the curated and superficial nature of online interaction can lead people to prioritize their own image, validation, and self-worth over genuine connection, which obviously can It can make it easier for people to disengage from relationships, conversations, meetings, whatever, without considering the emotional impact on others, which is key characteristics of ghosting. And Dr. K also highlighted, I love that podcast. It was like 2 hours long. And he highlighted how social media can make relationships feel more disposable, and how the constant flow of new connection and content can diminish accountability and interaction. When people are able to hide behind the scene, which obviously we mentioned, it can lead to a lack of empathy and detachment, making ghosting or standing someone up more common and acceptable on both personal and professional relationships. So when he explained that, I found it fascinating. And I think that is, Michael, you can elaborate on this. I think this is happening across cultures.
Yeah, I think it is. And I was just making some notes there. I think the technology does make it easier to get rid of people. I mean, people are used to dating apps where you swipe left or right, so you can just get rid of someone easily. Things, and you don't want to answer it. I mean, I never do this, but people just press. Well, imagine, in the past when you had the phone in the wall, if someone phoned you and you just put the phone down, it would be really rude, but it seems acceptable these days. And then it's very easy to block people. I mean, sometimes with a good reason. So the technology puts people into the habit, and I think you were talking before about habits. It gets people into the habit of being able to dispose of other people easily with just a push of a button or a swipe.
I don't know if any of you have heard of Jonathan Haidt. He is a sociologist who talks about, he has a book just came out called The Anxious Generation. And it talks about Gen Z and how from 2010 to 2015, with the advent of many of these social media platforms, there was a spike in mental health issues. Because as he mentions, we went from a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood. And the damage it has wreaked havoc on a whole generation of young people because it has thwarted their social skills. Just like you need to be able to be in contact with germs to create an immune system that's healthy, there's also a need for children to play without adult supervision in order to learn how to manage conflict, how to negotiate, how to deal with injustice without having outside intervention. And so he talks about how important it is for parents and schools and the next generation to remedy all of the things that have happened in order to create a more healthy environment, especially for the younger generations that have had to deal with, like you said, Michael, with all of these new technological phenomena that have affected their normal social development.
Dr. Pauline, I know you work you work on difference or gender at work. What do you see? Is it more male oriented, female? Does it matter which, or it's just all over? It doesn't matter who. It's basically personality.
I think it's a combination of everything. I mean, men and women do manage their communication in different ways, of course, and different generations. There's some threads across generations, but I think it is endemic because of the situations we're talking about. The use of, I was just thinking as we were talking, the use of a screen on a Zoom. We're all on screen. I run many meetings. I was president of the Rotary, which was an online club, and people wouldn't turn their screens on. And I found that really difficult to get to know people. And I would say, could we turn our screens on? and there would be a deep resistance from some people. And I'm a very visual person, so I find it hampers the communication when you can't see and you've given us a visual media. I happen to be very deaf, so I've got a hearing aid, so I'm not into great auditory things. Now that's my problem. But I think that, as we've all said, people get very used to the ease of cutting people out or not seeing. I don't have to be visual, so I can run away during a meeting. I could be doing anything. We don't know where they are. And I don't know that there is a difference between men and women. It depends. There's a nervousness about being on screen, which may affect women more because women are more susceptible to how do I look, and it interests me when people don't even have their face in the middle of the screen. They somehow shrunk away underneath the screen and you can only see their eyes. So there's a curious thing where we've got all this technology, but we don't necessarily know how to use it effectively. TikTok, Instagram, all these lives, everybody is out there live. There's so much noise. I'm very susceptible to the noise. It's easy to say, oh, I don't want that noise, I'll just cut it out. So there are some differences between men and women, because women are more, we're nurturers, we're carers. We want to be sure that we're involved on screen. Men sometimes might be just so interested in direct decision making that they use the screen or the technology in that way. I think the real issue is how do we shift something that's become quite habitual over a couple of generations now? I mean, 2000, when we shifted the millennial, we never realized what was coming. And now 2024, we're a quarter of the way through the century, and we've got this very, very deep habit of being able to use social media and technology to ignore people. We really need some quite drastic situation for people to come out. And in some ways, the pandemic forced us to go on screen, but also to go internal. So I think we need to explore the art of conversation. It's not just communication. To me, conversation is different to communication. Communication is a message. Do I receive it? Is it transactional? But conversations are transformational, and especially if they're in person. And talking about the 18 to 27-year-old group, which I'm dealing with a particular project, the client has said there must be touch points that are real and physical. So online stuff, yeah, but get people together in the room. And the impact is tremendous. So these young people, they do want to be physically in person together. And I think if we can orchestrate that more current in business or in social situations in communities, that's what we're losing. We've got to achieve some kind of community where these young people don't feel afraid to be there with different generations, and they're not nervous or they don't feel they're being judged. And that's the important thing, is the non-judgment. Because if you've been so used to social media and technology that you don't know another way, it can be quite fearful to go into those one-on-one, face-to-face situations. And so that's what I think we need to be caring of, not critical.
Michael, I know you travel around the world, and you are at different countries every other week or every week. What do you see happening out in the world of ghosting in the business world, or standing people up? And what would you say the solution may be, if you have any solution for this phenomenon?
Well, I mean, I think the problem is at two levels. One is generated, I think, by or catalyzed by technology. Those differences that I've mentioned previously, the national cultural differences, and different reasons why you might be stood up. I've been quite lucky, I think, because I was just thinking, like, nearly 40 years in business, I think I've only been stood up for a physical meeting once. and which is quite lucky, I think. And this was actually a Finnish lady, and she was so mortified with herself that she had flowers delivered to my office as an apology. So that was a very generous response to having screwed it up. A couple of weeks ago, it wasn't it was a situation, it was a friend. He was from America, and he's usually he's originally.
The sound is not very clear.
Near to where he was staying.
You're cutting out, Michael.
You're cutting out, Michael.
Let me try it. Yeah. Okay. Do you hear me better now?
Yes. Yes.
Is that any better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'd arranged to meet on a Friday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon at a particular pub. And hear me? Hello? I don't know.
I think your internet, it's being a little intermittent there. Your internet, I think it's not working too well.
Yeah.
You're freezing up a little.
No. Okay. Well, why doesn't someone else speak for a moment, and then we can try again?
Yeah. No. We're hearing you now. I believe we're hearing you.
Yeah. Cuts in and out.
Okay. Anyways, so we're supposed to be meeting at a Friday in a particular pub, and at 5 o'clock. And I went there and early. I'm always early. Sat there waiting and nothing. And it got to, Brits, and I've noticed this over years of observation. I can put a very accurate average number of minutes that they tend to be late. So I waited for the 7 minutes and he didn't appear. And then it got to 20 minutes. And then I remembered that actually he's Greek. So I came in with all my cultural stereotypes. I thought, well, he's Greek. He's going to be quite late. And that's fine. So I waited. And then I thought, as it got close to 6, so about an hour, he probably got the time wrong and he'll turn up at 6. Nothing. And then about 10 past 6, he and his wife ran out in the beer garden, and he looked amazed. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, we're waiting. You're over an hour late." He said, "Oh, we've actually, by sheer coincidence, been in this pub. We're on a date night. I thought we were meeting on Monday. I got it all mixed up. So then I got invited on his date night with his wife for dinner." But I mean, it was one of those situations where, he simply mixed up. And I think it was because he'd been traveling a lot. And he just remembered incorrectly. I mean, I don't know how I told this story, but I think partly.
That's so ridiculous. That is incredible.
He's likely to be late. But in fact,
Oh my goodness. I'm sure we all have lots of stories to tell.
It sure is. I can only say that what I've read is that a lot of times there's this chaotic shift between Gen Z feeling anxious and a little bit obsessed with relationships and a sense of withdrawal. And so that's kind of like it's working in between this contradiction. And many Gen Zers they say they would prefer to be face-to-face in a work environment, but at the same time, they say they would be totally fine with a complete 100% remote. So there's kind of like this, I think that there's this starving for connection, but they haven't really lived a lot of that. So they have this immaturity when it comes to the benefits that we had growing up, because that was all we knew. So I always wondered why my millennial daughter would be so anxious about grabbing the phone and solving stuff. And she'd be like, "Mom, I just don't know what to ask." And I'm like, you start with that. You're vulnerable and you say, "Hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me out?" There's a human being on the other end. Don't be afraid. But it's taken her until her 30s to be secure enough or confident enough that she can actually grab a phone and solve things now. But I can tell you that millennials, even 10 years ago, she would not grab a phone for the life of her. And again, that's where I can see how the asynchronous, the emailing, the texting, it became their safe spot. And having to deal with uncertainty real time is very difficult. And that's where I think that as consultants and specialists, we can really make a difference. I can tell you that many of my clients are asking me, Maria, as these early career professionals are starting to come in, they're going to be 30% of the workforce in a couple of years. They need assertiveness. They need conflict management. They need to be able to talk, right?
Absolutely. And they need conversation skills, because, conversation skills means you need to think about empathy, and are you listening to the other person? Are you truly finding out about them and sharing about yourself? It's a very circular two-way process. And then the gender difference, women are very good at talking to each other. Men are more transactional generally, but getting people into a conversation space without the controls of bosses' agendas and KPIs, just literally getting people talking and sharing, and that great aha moment when you go, oh, you're like me. Gosh, that's interesting. And then you can build a business relationship. And it's different to communication. So conversation is circular. And that's why I think sometimes it's seen as wasteful in the business world by those characters who just want action. We need action and we need interaction. If we don't have that, then we're going to lose the benefit of people engaging together in the workplace face to face as well as on the telephone. So I think it's a fascinating time to really shift the boundaries. I talk about taking a quantum leap to the future. Maybe I was fascinated to read that Steve Jobs refused his children having their mobiles the whole time. Did you read that? He said, I give them selective times to use it. Now, he helped us invent some of this swipe screen stuff, but he realized the dangers.
Many of the people in that industry don't give their kids cell phone or social media until they're in their late teens.
Absolutely. And I think, I noticed that with my children.
I must tell you a quick story here, which is connected to the Steve Jobs one. About 20 years ago, I used to coach the president of Nokia, and I had a team of about 2 or 3 of us. And one of my staff was teaching him to use rather than the passive voice, and to talk hypothetically, teaching basic. And he was extremely good, the right grammar for the sort of impression he wanted to make. And one day I was with the president of Nokia in his big office at the top of the building, and he said, "Oh, I need to fix up a session with Jim. Can you give me his mobile number?" I said, "He doesn't have a mobile phone." And this is the president of Nokia. And there was a moment's silence, and he got his phone and put it in the middle of the table, and he says, I wish I didn't have one.
Yeah, we become slaves to our devices. That's for sure.
Yeah. One more thing that I noticed across the board is also the aspect of personality profiles. Sometimes whether you are using, let's say, bank or using DISC as an example, there you will see variation between the type of personalities. Some would be more open to expressing their thoughts, while others, let's say, for example, the D personality versus the C personality, you would see a difference between these personalities. Perhaps we ought to dive in a bit more into the type of personalities we're dealing with as far as their expressiveness and willingness to share their thoughts freely without feeling that they will offend or hurt other people's feelings. Because when I'm working in the leadership sphere, there are a lot of people who are brilliant and they can talk their social butterflies, but when you ask them, okay, can you talk to so well, I'm afraid to offend them. I am afraid to cause harm or as far as feelings. Well, I mean, and I say, well, you just express it in a manner that is assertive, that is respectful, and in a manner where you getting your point across clearly. And it seems like there is a difficulty even in that aspect of expressing thoughts or willingness to express thoughts. And that's something that I feel or I believe that is a matter of training, matter of learning, matter of practicing as well.
Absolutely. So let me share that in my gender dynamics intelligence, I look at male female differences, but also masculine feminine energy differences. And it does impact the way people have conversations. So if we take an example, my two archetypes for men are the ruler and the philosopher. So the ruler is action man, masculine male. He likes to know when something's happening. So he's not into great long conversations. So he wants to be very transactional many times. Whereas the philosopher is the thinker, the observer. He'll say, why are we doing this? And therefore you get different responses. I was sharing with somebody that, when I send a long message to a ruler, they'll say, yes, no. If I send the same message to a philosopher, they'll say, well, that's a really interesting idea. I've thought about this and I'm going to do this, and they'll give you a long answer. So when you're in person or on social media or texting, it's going to be different responses. Now, women might expect a longer response from a man who's going to have a short response. They all get upset because the women are both masculine and feminine as well. I call them the magician and the sovereign. They respond like with a disc profile or colors. You can see these traits. The magician wants a lot of action. What are we going to do next? And the sovereign might be saying, who's involved here? Who's doing what? So when we hear these clues, then we can create a merge of conversation and contribution. But we have to listen and know that if somebody shortchanges us in an answer, it doesn't mean they dislike us. It means that that is their mode of operation, and vice versa. The man with a short sequence needs to listen to the longer chat that's coming from women. Otherwise, he might lose some of the jewels that's in the conversation. But when he's under pressure, he might go, oh, I just can't be bothered with this. Yes, no, get away. And then we get tension and fears turning up. Oh my goodness me, can I be in that meeting with that person that they don't like what I say? So it is very true, Mona. And that's really what I get people to do, is to really get into these conversations, understanding people say why, when, how, what, who, and make sure that we listen. And that's a trick. And listening on texting is very difficult, obviously.
Yes, yes. I mean, we are enjoying this conversation, and there's a lot to say, but we have to end it somewhere, and we cannot end it without giving solution. And here's what I'm going to say, and you can go ahead and answer that 30 seconds or less, whatever. Please don't ghost anyone. Why? Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to say don't ghost anyone, because you were likely to offend. And if you offend, you ripple out tension and nervousness. Just be authentic, be honest, be responsible.
Maria?
Don't ghost, because ultimately it feels terrible. You know what it feels like. So don't do it.
Okay. Michael?
My solution, and I've been thinking about this as we've been going along, is that there should be some courses out there that companies which teaches people a sort of etiquette of business communication. And maybe some people would resist it, but others might be quite willing to have some coaching on it, particularly if you point out first that this really is a problem. And some course, it could be a day long, just going through how are you as a communicator, maybe beginning with some sort of multiple choice assessment. Look, in this situation, what would you do? And be honest. And then looking at the results and then building on that, and actually teaching people about the different situations and how it feels. And you could even have people coming in, or maybe a video saying, this happened to me, and this is how it made me feel. Make people feel like this. And just finally, two situations that really annoy me, which are ghosting. Clients or potential clients who've said that they're really interested and you have quite a good dialogue with them, and then they just disappear with no explanation. And then maybe you manage to get in touch with them months later and they say, oh, we had a budget cut. Well, why didn't you tell me? And then the other one, and this is very frequent, is you put in a proposal and there are other competitors. And if you don't get it, if you don't win, they don't tell you. And then weeks later you can contact them and say, what happened? Oh, we gave it to someone else. Well, surely it's a courtesy. I mean, there was one recently, and I spent probably about a week altogether with a team of people putting in at this bid. And it was through an intermediary. And then I contacted the intermediary company. I said, have you heard from them? No. Could you get in touch? So they got in touch, and the clients, we decided for something else. Well, hours and hours of work and not said a thing.
Wow. Wow. Well, it is happening, and we can participate in making it better. And for me, I would say to the HR people, they are job seekers. They take time to work on their resume, take time to send their resume, search for a job. The least you can do is respond and tell them why they were not chosen for the job. This is just a matter of courtesy to the people who are taking from their time to apply to these jobs. I know sometimes people get bombarded with resume, but this is happening. This is when you don't answer to people who are addressing you through resumes. This is a form of ghosting, and no one like to be in that situation. So if we want to change the culture, if we want to have a healthy culture, we need to start by thinking, what would I have done if I was in that position? Or how would I feel if I was in that position? If we can approach every situation from that standpoint, trust me, we will have healthy relationships, successful relationships, and no one will be hiding behind any scene or behind any device thinking, oh my God, what should I say? What can I do? I am going to offend. So again, start any relationship, any conversation, and from the standpoint of mutual respect. If we can understand that maybe we can devise a plan to work together towards a successful ending. And that's how I will end this show and episode today. And I thank you so very much for your time, for your genuine, obviously you are sharing your thoughts, you've been candid. Thank you, Dr. Pauline. I know you are on the West Coast. Michael, I am always grateful for you. You put away. This is what we're talking about. This is the courtesy we're talking about. I reached out to Michael. Michael is delivering an important keynote in Lithuania, a different country where he resides, and still he took the time to answer back and he found a way to delay his dinner to be with us today, because this is a courtesy, this is respect, this is the manners in which we need to conduct business as professionals, not only as professionals, but as people and one family within the human race. So I
Great.
hope I made it clear. Thank you
Great.
so much. And
Well,
until then, yes,
Mona,
Michael.
everyone, I have to dash for dinner, but it was a
Okay.
pleasure to meet the ones I've not met before. So thank you very much indeed,
Thank
and
you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. We
All the
will
best.
end this and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.